All right, welcome out. We're in chapter five. We're working on the second half or the second part of chapter five, standards for thinking. So states here it is helpful to assume that the information being used in our own thinking or reasoning is not sufficient unless it can be proven that there is enough relevant, significant information in the argument to adequately deal with the task at hand. And again, it's about being comprehensive. It's about being having as much depth and breadth as possible to the argument, to the research that you've done, looking at as many angles uh, to the problem, or looking at the problem from as many angles as possible. You're not with more complex issues such as human physiology or climate change or the political environment, geopolitical environment. There's almost always going to be unanswered questions, but you want to be as rigorous as possible, as thorough as possible, to be not caught off guard too often, too frequently, on a regular basis. All right. So, anyways, so we went through first half of the chapter through the intellectual standards: clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, and significance. So, if and there's all the qualifying answers, fairness as well. I forgot, left that up. So, and sufficiency. All right. So, again, there's a lot there. Will you ever get it all? Will you be able to cover all of the standards or all of the angles? No. Yeah. Um, but you want to be as thorough as possible, as thorough as time allows, right? As as are most situations, most things, time is almost always a factor, right? And there have been ongoing issues that I've been concerned with looking into or looking at, such as immigration or legal immigration, climate change, wars, the wars in the Middle East, the Iraq War. There's a lot more to that than people initially assume. All right. And I've looked into it relatively extensively. No expert by any stretch of the imagination, but we're not trying to create experts. We're trying to create people, common folk, who are able to think well, right? And if you don't know, just state it and try to stay open-minded and humble and in a learning position. You're constantly going to be learning, um, learning and relearning or unlearning, getting new information, adding facts and whatever to your knowledge base, right? Anyways, bring together the elements of reasoning, intellectual standards. We have considered the elements of reasoning and the importance of being able to take them apart to analyze them so we can recognize flaws in our thinking. We also have introduced the intellectual standards as tools for assessment. Now let us look at how we can use the intellectual standards to assess the elements of reason. So, you're not just looking at the problem, looking outward. You're also looking inward, right? How are your analytical tools? What tools are you using? What do you know? What don't you know? How about yourself? Take a look at yourself. Are you being moral, ethical, reasonable, logical? You as a thinking instrument. How is that instrument functioning? Well, fairly well, peacefully, well, that type of thing. Critical thinkers use the elements of reasoning with sensitivity to universal intellectual criteria or standards, such as we mentioned before, clarity, precision, accuracy, relevance, significance, depth, breadth, logical sufficiency, and fairness. So here we have a nice diagram. It's always, since we're visual people, you usually want to put your learning into a visual context. Context. Here, the word context is putting these elements of thought into the context of what it is that you're thinking about or examining, the issue at hand, right? Critical thinkers use the elements of reasoning with sensitivity to universal intellectual criteria or standards. And there's the list right there, right? So what have you got? Purpose, goal, objective, function, question, at issue, problem or issue, information, data, facts, evidence, observation, uh, experiences, reason, research, whatever, right? Interpretation or inference. How do you infer? How are you inferring your conclusions and solutions? Concepts, theories, definitions, laws, principles, models. Assumptions, your presumptions, axioms. What do you take for granted, right? Those types of things. Implication and consequences, that which follows logically affects. Point of view, frame of reference, perspective, orientation, worldview. So point of view, and I was just going over this yesterday in class, as a matter of fact. And I was telling my students, they're writing an argument paper, when you're arguing, you're using critical thinking, without a doubt. So what is the filter that your critical thinking or thinking is coming through? What's your background? To what extent? Well, you've got age, you've got family or familial influences, you've got culture and religion, you've got the political, you've got the socioeconomic, you've got the time, you've got the geographic location, the place, and so there's a lot of factors involved that are your perspective of seeing of things are coming through, right? Purpose, goal, or end view. Whenever we reason to some end, to achieve some objective, satisfy some desire, or fulfill some need, right? And sometimes our objective or desire or need gets in the way of seeing things clearly, right? I really need to prove that I'm right about this thing. Why? Just because you want to be right? Because you've believed in whatever it is that you've believed in for quite some time, maybe without question. Who knows? Right? People do get attached, emotionally attached. As a critical thinker, you shouldn't, but we do. We're human, so you've got to work hard at not being emotionally attached or limiting the emotional attachment to your understanding of things because of need or desire, right? I am a fill in the political party. I am a Democrat. I am a Republican. I am a whatever, and I need to be right because I want my party to succeed, right? That type of thing. One source of problems in human reasoning is traceable to defects at the level of goal, purpose, or end. If the goal is unrealistic, for example, a contradictory or to other goals we have, it is confused or muddled. The reasoning we use to achieve it will suffer, right? And we are full of contradictions. We are full of doubt. I was going to say we're full of heresy, but that's another problem. That's for another day. Contradictions, without a doubt. We do contradict ourselves. Do we do it intentionally? Maybe sometimes, but often we do it because we're forgetful people. We just don't remember everything as well as we want to, or should, or could, right? That type of thing. And here's the criteria, a little more detailed explanation or question. And I guess you could say, here's some questions to use in evaluating. When you're evaluating reasoning, purpose, what is the purpose of the reasoner? Is the purpose clearly stated or clearly implied? Is it justifiable? I will often tell my students, for instance, that I don't have a dog in the race. I don't have a pony in the race, however you want to say it, right? My objective is usually trying to uh, help the individual to gain clarity, to gain understanding, to gain insight, knowledge, better uh, tool or tools, toolbox, filling up that toolbox with better tools so that one is better, more apt or able to think clearly, logically, thoroughly, succinctly, and so forth and so on, right? So that's my aim. I'm not about money, politics, power, influence. That's not my game. But some people are, and you've got to be careful, right? You know, what sources are the main sources of information or understanding of things as you know them, right? Coming from the mainstream media, maybe coming from education, or coming from Hollywood, or coming from television, podcaster. What are those various sources? What's their agenda? What are they pushing? If you listen to Democrats explain the reasoning behind why Republicans are doing something, it's usually defaming, it's usually in the negative, and vice versa, right? And they're it's almost always one group trying to just take down the other group. Yeah, is what they say accurate all the time? Some of the time, part of the time, half the time, never. There's some accuracy, but that's why you have to learn to think for yourself, right? That's why you have to be above the fray, as I've said before. You have to be floating above it all, not as a superior entity, right, but a uninfluenced entity, right? Again, tough to do because you're human. You do have influences, um, many which I've already described, right? So it's difficult. It's difficult, right? So you kind of got to take the emotion and the intellect and the spirit and whatever else is in there and kind of push it down and just be above the fray and just look at the facts. Facts, man. Excuse me. Um, Question. Is the question well stated? Is it clear, unbiased? Good luck with that, right? Especially in certain realms. But does the expression of the question do justice to the complexity of the matter? I personally, since I'm about educating, I'm about educating the vessel. I want the vessel pure, right? As pure as possible. I want it to learn. I want the vessel, the student, to learn, right? So what I will do is I'll take issues from the perspective of the left, from the center, and from the right to show difference, or I'll have them explain what is the difference. What is the difference between someone who comes from a particular this culture, that culture, this culture, that culture, or religious background, or socioeconomic status, or political leaning? Those are always great discussions, right? Where does all that lie, or what are those possibilities? Where do all those possibilities lie? And then that's why you have to become an you know you have to have empathy, right, for different points of view. Information. Does the reasoner cite relevant evidence, experience, and so forth, right? Concepts. Does the reasoner clarify key concepts? Are they used justifiably? Assumptions. Does the reasoner show sensitivity to what he or she is taking for granted, right? Insofar as those assumptions might reasonably be questioned. Inferences. Does the reasoner develop a line of reasoning explaining well how he or she is arriving at his or her main conclusions? I try to do that for sure. Does the reasoner point of view, does the reasoner show sensitivity to alternate relative points of view? As I said before, implication, does the reasoner show sensitivity to implication? But again, there's a lot here. You got to take some time with this. You got to be patient. You can't just, you know, boldly run into the middle of something helter skelter without much pre-thought or consideration, right? You gotta back it off and take some time. As a developing critical thinker, get in the habit of explicitly stating the purposes you are trying to accomplish. You should strive to be clear about your purpose in every situation. If you fail to stick to your purpose, you are unlikely to achieve it. There you go. Oh, so key. As a student interested in developing your mind, and that should be your key point of interest, you can begin to ask questions that improve your ability to focus on purpose in your classes. That's good. And that's what this textbook is great at, right? It really takes the student to heart. It takes the student into consideration. And it looks at critical thinking, but it also looks at critical thinking from the perspective of the student as a learning tool, in the here and now and the afterlife, or after one has graduated from college as well. Question an issue or problem to be solved. Whenever you attempt to reason through something, you're attempting to answer at least one question that emerges from the problem to be solved or issue to be resolved, an area of concern in assessing reasoning. Therefore, revolves around that very question. An important part of being able to think well is assessing your ability to formulate a problem in a clear and relevant way. It requires determining whether the question you're addressing is important. That's important, right? Some people have a tendency to waste their time with relatively, extremely insignificant things on the internet. Some video about, I don't know, a fight. I saw there was a fight somewhere recently. Maybe it was in Texas, outside of a bar, and a bunch of football fans were fighting, right? So does that need to be really thought about and a lot of time spent on analyzing the situation, the fight, what caused it, and blah, blah, blah? No, of course it does. Right? So, but choose your fights, as they say, and of course the most important ones are the ones that you really have to spend some time focusing on. Whether it is answerable, whether you understand the requirements for settling the question, solving the problem. As a student interested in developing your mind, you can also ask yourself questions that will improve your ability to focus on the important questions in your class. So you can ask, what is the most fundamental question at issue, right? What is the question precisely? Is the question simply simple or complex? If it is complex, what makes it complex? Am I sticking to the question that I'm working on? Is there more than one important question? So forth and so on. And as you practice this, you train yourself to be a better question asker. There's a video that I show my students. I like to show them critical thinking in action in the real world. And there's one video I show. It's about a 10, 12-minute video. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a scientist. He's a stargazer. And he's being asked, do you believe in UFOs? Now, if you understand what is really being asked there, belief as a scientist and empirically a scientist and based in empirical observation and data, right? You would know that belief has little to do with it, right? Is there enough factual evidence to suggest, with a preponderance of evidence, that there is more likely than not extraterrestrial life that has visited this planet? See what I did there? So it's a lot more there. It's a lot deeper than, do you believe in UFOs? Right. Of course, that's what he brings up in his response. It's not about believing. Nobody cares about what you believe or think or feel. Is there evidence, right? Solid, hard, empirical evidence. The figuring mind. I like here's your object you're looking at. The object of focus must have a logic must have a logic, something to figure out. Uh, there is a logic to figuring something out, to constructing a system. There are intellectual standards critical thinkers use to assess whether the logic in our mind mirrors the logic of the things to be understood. The elements of thought reveal the logic, right, and so forth, right? Then you get your intellectual standards over here. So that's a nice little chart. I like the fact that they have these charts in here. It helps visual learners, but also helps all learners because we are by nature more visual than we are intellectual. Rather than just closing our eyes and listening to someone or reading a bunch of words on a page, we oftentimes have a better chance at understanding something if we see it. That's why the term "I see" is popular, not "I intellectually crunched that." I intellectually reasoned that out. You say "I see." So we are by nature more than not, more than anything else, visual people, right? Point of view, frame of reference. Whatever we reason, we must do so within some point of view. True. I think we've already talked about that somewhat. Any defect in this point of view, frame of reference, is a possible source of problem in our reasoning. Point of view may be too narrow, based on false, misleading information, unfair, containing contradiction. And these, we like to narrow it. I don't include myself, but people like to narrow it, I guess, right? They also like to use false or limited or misleading information, unfair, and that which contains contradiction could be full of contradiction. Doesn't matter. Because what I'm trying to do is just prove the other side wrong, right? And a lot of that happens in the political realm, right? I've got 100 sources of information. There's, this subject has been researched 100 times with conclusive evidence and data. Within those 100 times of researching whatever is being researched, blah, blah, blah. And 10 agree with what I have to say or think or feel or need. 90 do not. I'll just ignore the 90 and say, look, 10 experts have said, well, what about the other 90, right? We'll just ignore that. And that'll be unfair, and that'll be misleading, and that will be a narrow point of view, right? You're leading the witness, sir. Critical thinkers strive to adopt a point of view that is fair, hopefully, even to the opposing point of view. They want their point of view to be broad, flexible, justifiable, and to be stated clearly and adhere to consistently. Like, for instance, I heard someone who opposed Trump, was probably opposed Trump, because he was talking about the tariffs, taxes on incoming goods, and our imports, and he was saying tariffs are dirty, they're evil. It's basically a tax that the people, or us Americans, would have to pay, and that's evil, and that's true. But that's what tariffs are used for. Tariffs are taxes. There's literally millions of markets for possible potential goods out there, but there are some key goods that are of greatest concern for the government. And the government, one of its greatest concerns should be the people, and making sure that people are living freely, they're protected, they have jobs and food to eat, place to stay, and so forth, right? So the products that are selected, these are selective taxes, right? Are put on a few goods, right? So those tariffs do not increase prices overall. Ridiculous. They'll increase prices just on those very few goods that are having tariffs applied to them. And the reason why you want to apply tariffs to those products is because you don't want people buying those products maybe from China. China seems to be the main country of issue, because they're our greatest threat, right? It's definitely not Iran or Russia, very poor, weak countries with no or limited military means, right? China, different story. Okay. CCP, not the people, the Communist Party, right? So anyways, and Nancy Pelosi talked about this. There's a video out there floating out there from 1995 talking about the exact same thing and sounding just like Trump, right? But again, that doesn't matter. They'll ignore that because they're not interested in necessarily getting the facts out or being truthful or honest. They just want to attack the opposition, the Democrats, right? And I'm not saying that Republicans are saints. The parties is what parties do to each other, right? I'm not a fan of parties or politicians or politics. Just to let you know, because I know, I know what's going on. So I've been soured to the whole deal, spiel, the whole spiel for quite some time. Anyway, so make a long story longer. You ever hear that phrase? To make a long story short. Well, if you keep talking, you're just adding to it. So, anyways, to make a long story longer, and hopefully not as long as I could make it, but it's a lot easier to say. To make a long story short, right? That's why they say it. Easier to say, but inaccurate. Anyways, so yeah, that's what they want to do. They want to increase prices of some goods so that the people in the United States will not buy them. I'm not going to buy them. Look at the price has gone up because of the tariff, the tax, right? So I'm going to buy, instead of buying China's goods, I'm going to buy the same goods that are manufactured here by Americans. So you see the benefits, right? And that's one of the benefits of tariffs. There's a lot more going on there, but again, I'm not going to get into the whole background, a thorough look at tariffs, but I just wanted to bring that up to show you that you have to be careful. Don't be too narrow-minded. Don't base what you're saying on misleading information or on being unfair or, an analysis or opinion that's based in contradictions or heresy or lies or, whatever, that type of thing. Anyway, as a person interested in developing your mind, beginning to ask yourself questions that will improve your ability to focus on the point of view in your classes. These questions might be from what point of view am I looking at the issue? Am I so locked into my point of view that I'm unable to see the issue from other points of view? Must I also consider multiple points of view, probably to reason well through the issue at hand? Somebody online was talking about, oh yes, Islam and Islam. Members of Islam worship the same God as Christians. No. Well, I don't know if it's the same God, but the definitions of those gods differ. You've got, if you read, there are 6 major religions, right? And you would have to read the Dhammapada, the Rig Veda, the Analects of Confucius, the Quran, the New Testament, if you're a Christian, right? And maybe the Torah, which is the Old Testament. That's 6. Did I get 6 right? So you've got those 6. Those are the 6 major religions. And you would have to really look at those and look at the God or the gods. Some are monotheistic, some are multi-theistic, right? But none of them are worshiping the same God, if you understand how the God or gods or goddesses are defined in those religions. What is their modus operandi, their mode of operation, right? So, and of course, I'm reading that and I put my 2 bits in there, right? So people love to just, I think they want to be right, but they're so wrong so often. That's one thing we do well. We're really good at being wrong, right? And if I didn't know, I probably wouldn't say anything, right? But religion is a big thing. It's very pervasive in our society, just like monetary issues or banking or trade or taxation. So those are some things that I've looked into considerably since they're very pervasive and applicable to most of us in most of the world, right? Anyways, point of view of the author, what was the frame of reference and all that stuff, right? You get the point, right? Think for yourself. I love these exercises. Think for yourself. Concepts, theories, and ideas. All reasoning uses some ideas or concepts and not others. These concepts include theories, principles, axioms, and rules, implicit or implied in your reasoning. Any defect in the concepts or ideas of this reasoning is a possible source of problems in our reasoning, right? For my students, I also went over the issues in regards to climate change. And there's so much there and so much that most people don't know anything about whatsoever, right? But it's out there. It's obvious as day. If you just take a little bit of time and do a little bit of research, the information is out there. But people love to just, I'm of a particular mindset, or I have particular needs, or I have a particular angle. Then I'm going to certain people or a group or a party that I listen to. So if they come up with it, I'll just parrot or mimic what they say. And if you do that, you're going to probably get into trouble more times than not, right? Because a lot of those groups or individuals do have biases. They will leave out information. They will uh, cherry pick, right? You've heard that term. Right? Anyways, so you're interested in developing mind as a student, begin to ask questions that will improve your ability to focus on the importance of concepts in your classes. These questions may include: what is the most fundamental concept I need to learn in this class? How does this concept connect with other key concepts in the course? What are the most important theories in this class? And so forth, right? Questions, questions, questions. And I could tell you that 80, 90%, if not more, of students don't do this. Rarely, if ever. Well, why would they? First of all, in the first place, nobody exposes them to this stuff, right? And there's very few reflective, and unless you're of a mindset or a disposition, I think there's 9 different types of intelligences. And one type of intelligence is one who is reflective or a thinker, like a poet, a writer, something like that, someone like that. They might eventually figure it out, right? I'm a reflective person. So eventually when I finally got to about late 20s, early 30s, and I said, something's really wrong. I got to start looking into stuff. And that's how I ended up on this path, right? Things just don't quite make sense, right? That type of thing. All reasoning must be assumptions. All reasoning must begin somewhere. It must take some things for granted. Any defect in the assumptions or presuppositions, as in happening before. Even before I start thinking about something, I've already thought about how I'll think about that something or some things, right? Right? I'm coming from a particular culture, religion, time, place, bias, perspective, familial influence, political influence, socioeconomic influence. Maybe I'm influenced by friends or what I read or the shows I watch on television, or I don't know, whatever. The books I read, the fantasies I read, or whatever, right? The television shows I watch, right? With which reasoning begins is a possible source of problems in reasoning. Implications, consequences. Whenever we reason, implications follow from our reasoning. When we make decisions, consequences result from those decisions. As critical thinkers, we want to understand the implications wherever they occur. We want to be able to trace logical consequences and see what our actions are leading to. We want to anticipate possible problems before they arise. That'll be good, right? Some of us don't do that. Some of us are very undisciplined intellectually, emotionally, right? And we just, sometimes you can make a rash decision or choice that could ruin things briefly, temporarily, long term, or the rest of your life, right? You make some foolish decision in public or on foot or maybe in traffic, and then, you pay for that poor decision the rest of your life, right? It's worst case scenario, you'll end up in jail or prison, right? No matter where we stop tracing implications, there always will be further implications, and the same can be said of further consequences too. Any defect in our ability to follow the implications or consequences of our reasoning is a potential source of problems in our thinking. Our ability to reason well then is measured in part by our ability to understand and enunciate, right, the implications and consequences of reasoning. I was thinking before, I think I've talked about these exercises a couple of times. If you're interested, more exploration right within those exercises. A lot of good ways of actually working the muscle or muscles of what it is that you're thinking about. This is the way to learn. You can listen to a lecture. You can even read without annotating. Annotating is being engaged. Writing notes in the margins and interacting with the concepts and the ideas, or maybe even the author. I know that. That's a key point. That's interesting. What does that mean? Da, da, da. Summarizing, underlining, and so forth. Right. That's really learning, and not just going over once. But if I'm really going to learn something, especially something of relative complexity, I'm going to go over it at least very thoroughly, 7 to 10 times, bare minimum in the beginning, and then just, of course, keep refreshing and adding to that knowledge through continued exposure. Right. Inferences: all reasoning proceeds by steps in which we reason as follows, because this is so, that also is so, or possibly so, or because this, therefore that. Ergo propter hoc. That's your critical thinking, right? The mind perceives a situation or a set of facts and comes to a conclusion based on those facts. When taking this step of the mind, and inference results. Any defect in our ability to make logical inferences presents a possible problem in our reasoning. Right? Oh yes, it's all in there. Brief guidelines for using intellectual standards. All reasoning has a purpose. Take time to state your purpose clearly. Choose significant, realistic purposes, and so forth. Right? All reasoning is an attempt to figure something out, to settle some question, to solve some problem. All reasoning is based on assumptions. True. Right? There's a lot here. I'm not going to go through all of these in market detail. Again, this is a brief overview. I've spent after I'm done with all of these chapters, or most of them at least, hours and hours. But you could easily spend, and you should probably spend, years, weeks and weeks, month and month, months and months, years. Right? I've been at this decades. Right? Like a little bit of a head start. All reasoning is done from some point of view, and much of this we've already talked about, right? All reasoning is based on data, information, evidence. All reasoning is expressed through and shaped by concepts, ideas. All reasoning contains inferences or interpretations by which we draw conclusions. That's another thing I see my students say: based on the evidence, this proves. Yeah, usually, even in a court of law, um, nothing is 100%. There's no such thing as 100% guilty or 100% not guilty, right? There's usually a preponderance of evidence. If you saw that AI movie recently called Mercy, I think that you needed, what was it, 90, to be under 93% to stay your execution. If it was over 93%, or maybe it was 96, I forget. Anyways, mid to high 90s. If it went under, then you would be able to, I would guess, get an attorney and go from there. But it stayed that too high. You're dead right there. So the AI was judge, jury, and executioner, unless that uh, uh, percentage of guilt, kind of like Vegas. What's the percentage of chance of that team winning? Unless your percentage of guilt went under 93.2% or something, some specific calculated percent. We're just going to kill you right here in the chair. So there might be a problem with that, right? Concept. So right off the bat, we're moving into Nazi territory. All reasoning leads somewhere or has implications and consequences. That should be self-evident, right? All reasoning has a purpose. So here's again some charts. There's way too much here. I lost my cursor. Try again. Question at concern or central problem. I mean, maybe I could do a whole video on just skilled reasoners, unskilled reasoners, critical reflections. All right. Um, these charts might be good to do point of view. Point of view, it's interesting. All reasoning is done from, I'll just take a look at this one chart. I'm not going to do them all, but we'll take a little longer look at this chart. Maybe I'll do another video if I find these worthy of going over. As I said, this book has a lot of pages. It has a lot of stuff, probably way more than most people can tolerate. I don't want to say more than it needs to be, but definitely a lot of information, a lot of pages, a lot of chapters, a lot of looking at stuff. So, anyways, point of view, all reasoning is done from some point of view, primary intellectual standards, flexibility, fairness, relevance, breadth, depth, clarity, common problems, restricted, biased, unclear. Principles. To reason well, you must identify the viewpoints relevant to the issue and enter these viewpoints empathetically. Right? And again, there's a lot of terminology in this text, in these chapters, in this chapter. Is it about memorizing everything in minute detail, and becoming a database yourself? No. You want to have a pretty good feeling for how to think and think well. You might never reach level 6, which is the most skilled reasoner or critical thinker, I should say. I don't even know if I'm there, or if anybody's there. There might be a few people, but you want to be at least 4 or 5, pretty well practiced, so that you're not going to be caught off guard too poorly or too badly or too much on a regular basis. Skilled reasoners, what do you got? Keep in mind that people have different points of view, especially on controversial issues. Unskilled do not credit alternate reasonable point of view. Critical reflections. Have I articulated the point of view from which I am approached this issue, right? So I would go over this column. Maybe be familiar with this from the unskilled, but look at the skilled. That's where you want to be, right? And kind of get it into your mind by looking at these specific statements or definitions or terms or explanations of skilled reasoning, and start to get those images into your mind, right? So that you can start working them into your brain and making them a part of your DNA, making them organic, right? That's what you're shooting for, right? And I now am able to think well, and think clearly because I've been doing it a lot. Exactly how I get there, why I get there, and why I get there so thoroughly is not something that I think through each time on a step-by-step basis. It's just something that I've been doing so long. Now it's become organic. It's become like second nature, right? It just happened. Like to play sports, I played mostly basketball, a little bit of football and baseball, but mostly basketball. And after a while, you practice enough, you play enough, you shoot enough, you dribble enough. I remember there were times when I was putting up shots and making shots, and I wasn't even looking at the ball or really thinking or looking at what I was doing, and it would work out. You have worked it out so much. You have thought it through so much, so often, or done it so often, that your body just kind of takes over instinctively, right? And that's where you want to get with your thinking, right? Where it becomes instinctual, second nature. It's a part of your subconscious, right? Not the unconscious, right? Concepts and ideas. Again, way too much to go over piecemeal or piece by piece. So I think that's it, right? That'll do it, my friend. All right. So next chapter, ask questions that lead to good thinking. So we're going to keep moving forward. As you see here, there's some 20 chapters. Again, I don't know, I don't think I'm going to be doing all 20 of these chapters, but probably the majority, probably like 15 or so. There's some toward the end I can probably leave out. Here's your advanced thinker, right? I'll definitely do that chapter, but some of these I might combine or skip over or skip entirely. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right, so that's it. That's it for now. Talk to you later. Take care.